Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Senator Maria Collett, and I am proud to represent parts of Bucks and Montgomery counties in Pennsylvania's 12th senatorial district. You know, filing your taxes can be complicated in a typical year, and as we know, 2020 was a year unlike any other, and many found themselves in changing financial situations. Whether you received unemployment or other government benefits, got a new job, received or didn't receive federal stimulus checks, all of these elements and more could potentially impact how you file your taxes. Fortunately, there are resources available to help us navigate our taxes and local experts ready to assist. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by two of those experts. Dr. Steve Balsam, a professor of accounting at Temple University's Fox School of Business, who also runs the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, and Richard Furlong, a senior stakeholder liaison with the Internal Revenue Service's Communications and Liaison Division. Again, thank you both for sharing your knowledge with us today and answering constituent questions. Now, I'm going to pass things over to my communications director, Bailey Landis, who will get us started today. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to jump right into things and get started with some presentations from our panelists today. If you are joining us on Facebook, please feel free to comment any questions you have, and we'll get to as many as we can, as well as some pre-submitted questions that we have already received. So with that being said, I'm just going to pass it over to our first presenter, Dr. Balsam.
Thank you, Bailey. I'd also like to thank the Senator for her nice introduction. And I'd like to concur with her that filing taxes are never easy. And this season has been very tough on both the taxpayer and the tax preparer. So if you're feeling stressed about it, you are not alone. Okay, a little background about what we do and where it all started. So we prepare returns under the oversight of the IRS as part of what they call the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. And it commonly is also known by its acronym VITA. And the program was established over 50 years ago with the goal of providing assistance for low and moderate income individuals and families in filing their tax returns. As was mentioned, Temple University has its site. Physically, we operated out of the Ambler campus, which is in Montgomery County in this senatorial district, since 2008. And we did that until March of 2020, when everybody knows COVID hit. Since then, we have been operating virtually, and we are doing our best to help you whether you're computer savvy or not, but I'll get into that a little later. Now, because we are an IRS chartered site, and because we are working under the supervision of the IRS, all of our volunteers, all of our tax preparers have to pass IRS certification exams. Okay, there's actually multiple exams that they have to pass. In addition, as an educational institution, we do require additional training. So our students attend 20 hours of in-class training, which is on top of what they have to do for the IRS. So this is what you may be interested in. Who can we help? So again, we are chartered by the IRS. We work under their supervision. We prepare tax returns free of charge. Okay, please don't offer us a gratuity. We're not allowed to accept that. And the IRS basically defines our income thresholds, or who we can serve. So in terms of dollar amounts, they define low and moderate income to be income less than $57,000. Okay, I also want to caution that despite our extensive training, our preparers are still volunteers. And the IRS, rightly so, limits the types of returns we can do. Again, to echo Senator Collett, taxes are complicated, very complicated. Okay, so they limit the type of returns we can do. They refer to them as scope restrictions. So for example, we can't do your return if you own a business. Although we can do your return if you drive an Uber. We cannot do your return if you own rental property. And we most definitely cannot do your return if you are a day trader. And unfortunately, I've seen too many returns this year. People sitting home and just trading, bored and trading. So we can't do your returns under those conditions. And those are just a few of the IRS limits. So how can we help? So we can prepare and electronically file returns for the years 2016 through 2020. Okay, we are seeing a lot of 2019 returns this year because a lot of people did not have the returns filed by March of last year when COVID shut down everything. We can also prepare amended returns for those years, as well as, and that includes 2020. Now, I'm hoping to learn from my colleague at the IRS in a few minutes what the status is of, last week's tax changes, because a lot of returns have already been filed this year, reporting unemployment as income or fully reporting unemployment as income. The guidance from the IRS so far is don't file amended returns for those clients. I'm hoping to learn more about it in a few minutes, but if necessary, we can prepare those amended returns. Now for 2021, starting actually in March of 2020, we operate remotely due to COVID concerns and restrictions. The university is very strict about people on campus, let's just put it that way. Now, as you may know, if not, it will be repeated in a few minutes, the IRS will be accepting returns until May 17th. We, however, will only be open until April 24th. That's the last day for us to start returns. We're working on a university schedule, and most of the volunteers are students, and they have other things to get on to, like final exams. How do we operate? Okay, so the returns are primarily prepared by Temple University accounting students. Occasionally, a non-accounting major will slip in, but they are generally prepared by Temple University accounting students. So people who you might think have a little aptitude for this side of things. The returns are then reviewed by a cohort of senior staff that includes both active and retired Temple University accounting faculty, certified public accountants, enrolled agents, which, while not as common as a CPA, is a specialist tax designation, and lawyers, although I should say lawyer this year because we only have one on our staff. So the returns are prepared by, rookies, if you will, just undergraduate students, but they are quality reviewed, which is another IRS requirement, by experienced, knowledgeable reviewers. Okay, so how can you get to us this year? Okay, in contrast to previous years where you would call up or send an email and we would give you a time slot, you can't do that this year. Okay, instead, we will call you to schedule an appointment once we have all the information, which we get from you, necessary to prepare your return. Now, the slides are just not big enough for me to give you a list of all the documents that we might need, and what we might need depends on your circumstances. So to get that list, you can email us at that email address, VITA, it's the acronym for VITA, of course, at temple.edu, or you can pop it in a request in Senator Collett's website, and we will email you, which, as it says there, is faster, or postal mail you the list. Among other issues this year we're having is that the mail is operating sometimes slower than in previous years. Let's just put it that way. Okay, so how can you get us your documents? Okay, the fastest way is to upload your documents to this particular hyperlink, getyourrefund.org/TUVS, which stands for the last 4 letters is the acronym for Temple University VitaSite. Okay, this is available through our partnership with Code for America, who developed Get Your Refund. Code for America is a national nonprofit specializing in, well, computer coding. This website will actually walk you through the intake process. It will let you know what documents you need to upload. So you will be putting your documents on a secure website. They also have live chat to help you through the process. And they will communicate with you. And after they hand you off, our intake specialists will communicate you through text, email, and phone. Okay, I should let you know, if you do get a phone call about your return, it will come from a 650 area code, which is where Code for America is headquartered. Now, to do this, to utilize this really great service, you don't need a computer. It'll help, but you don't need it. A tablet, such as an iPad, or a smartphone will work as well. You can also, so a lot of our clients, okay, we do cater to a clientele that is not as tech savvy as the general population, and definitely not as tech savvy as our students who, you know, it's a generational thing. You can also mail us copies of your tax documents to our post office box, which you see on the screen there. Okay, now I emphasize, do not mail us the originals. Personally, I will put all your copies back in the mail as soon as your return is done. However, just, you know, there is always a risk of things getting lost in the mail. So I don't want your originals. Plus, how would you drive your car if you mailed me your original driver's license? Okay, so mail copies of your documents. And given the slowness of the Postal Service this year, a workaround that many of our clients have used is just hand delivering an envelope with your documents to the Springhouse Post Office. They will charge you postage, but it will, you know, be delivered to us, you know, that same day. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, Professor. And let's see if I can share my screen here. Let me know if you can when that comes up. I think it is up. Can you see
It's
that?
working. Yep.
Okay, great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, excuse me. It's a pleasure to be here. As you can see, my name is Richard Furlong. I am a senior stakeholder liaison within the IRS Communication and Liaison Division. And it's my pleasure to be here to accept Senator Collett's invitation to discuss this highly unusual and challenging tax season. As the professor just indicated, this is challenging not only for the volunteers who do extraordinary work every tax season, beginning well before tax season with the training that Professor Balsam described, and then the ongoing delivery of that service to many millions of Americans around the country. So we thank the professor for his longstanding involvement with the VITA program. Within the Internal Revenue Service, as you know, and as probably we will get into in the discussion, much is happening, both with new COVID-related legislation that began almost exactly a year ago in late March of 2020, when the pandemic was first starting to affect the country and the economy. And then proceeding through the end of the year, in December, there was another significant piece of COVID-related legislation. And then just a little over a week ago, on March 11th, President Biden signed yet another large piece of legislation. It's referred to as the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And all of these pieces of legislation impact the current tax season and will impact the next tax season in 2022. So before we get into the Q&A, I'm going to focus on some IRS resources, and then I'll touch on a couple of hot button topics, if you will, involving the stimulus payments and how that is working, and also the unemployment compensation, which the professor alluded to as a result of the recent legislation. So with that, let me see here if I can. So not surprisingly, given all of the complexity of this tax season, with the new legislation, we have a significant number of Americans trying to reach the Internal Revenue Service with questions, seeking clarification on some of the new tax laws as they impact their 2020 tax returns, and also, as is the case every year, checking on the status of any refund that has been claimed on a return that has been filed, and now perhaps checking on the stimulus payments. So as a result, and also as a result of budget cuts over a number of years, we are significantly understaffed and frankly stretched with our phone resources. So one of the messages that I would like to deliver today is that wherever possible, if one has access to a computer or a tablet or a smartphone, and you can access irs.gov online, many of your questions, including the status of your refund, and as we'll see, the status of any stimulus payment that is coming out now, they can be addressed through apps that we have on irs.gov. We also have a mobile app, IRS To Go, which is very popular. So that one of the key messages for folks like me is to, wherever possible, minimize attempts to reach the IRS. And then if you do have to call the IRS, maybe because you've gotten a letter or a notice, always have that letter or notice nearby. Sometimes if you went to someone to assist you with your taxes, whether a volunteer, a family member, or a paid qualified tax professional, those individuals can also help the taxpayers if they get letters and they need to call the IRS to resolve the issue or perhaps provide more information. But that's more the exception than the rule. We really encourage you, wherever possible, when you have the technology, to go to irs.gov for around-the-clock information, as the slide says. Let's see if I can go on to the third slide. So this should be the slide that says e-file, free file, and direct deposit, all of which we strongly encourage. And this resonates with the professor's message because the VITA program around the country, they do electronic filing almost exclusively. There may be one exception that I'll get into later if one's Social Security number has been compromised by a fraudster and a fraudulent return has been filed. But absent that, these days, the majority of the 160 million or so 1040s that we anticipate receiving are electronically filed, which is the safest way to file, to ensure that there are no math errors on the return that could generate a letter, and also the quickest way to get your refund. The third bullet on the slide references a public-private consortium that IRS set up about 15 years ago with the software industry. It's called Free File. And Free File allows any taxpayer or family with income of $72,000 or less to go to irs.gov and search Free File and then pick from a menu of partners in the software industry who offer free electronic filing for federal taxes. So this is really for those do-it-yourselfers who are somewhat comfortable navigating software. And we actually have seen some increase in the use of free electronic filing. We've also seen an increase in self-prepared 1040s using commercial software that is downloaded. Although, without speaking for the professor, we know the intricacies of the tax code, and as Senator Collett indicated at the outset, over half of those 160 million returns that we will receive are prepared by third-party preparers, whether VITA or professional preparers. But there are still folks who like to do their taxes themselves, and we encourage them to do it online electronically. Now, Where's My Refund is probably an application that many of the senator's constituents are familiar. We've had it for many years. We strongly encourage folks, maybe waiting a week or 2 weeks after they electronically file their return and after it is accepted by IRS systems, and if they're claiming a refund, then go into the Where's My Refund tool. As you can see, you can also go to our homepage, irs.gov, and you'll see Where's My Refund. You can click on that, and it asks some information about your Social Security number, your filing status, and the dollar amount of your refund. And then you can see the status of the processing of the return, which goes in 3 stages. The first is the return is received, stage 1. Stage 2 is that after we've reviewed the return and are, whether through our computer systems or in some cases through examiners reviewing items on the return, cross-checking, let's say, against W-2 information coming to us from the Social Security Administration. Then once we're ready to release the refund, it goes into step 2. And then step 3 gives you the date the refund will be issued. We also encourage direct deposit wherever possible. It's the safest way to get one's refund. And as the slide indicates, Where's My Refund is updated once a day, so you really don't have to check it more often than not. Now, turning now to the stimulus payments, which are technically those that were issued last spring and summer into the fall. They were called the economic impact payments. They were actually the first round of economic impact payments based on the March 2020 legislation. And then Congress passed another bill in late December, which created a second wave of economic impact payments to eligible Americans. And literally, there were hundreds of billions of dollars in these first 2 rounds of economic impact payments that were issued. The first 2 rounds have all been issued now. There's not going to be no further issuance of the first wave of economic impact payments, nor the second wave of economic impact payments. So for folks who did not receive the economic impact payment 1 and or 2, then if they're eligible based on their 2020 income and family circumstances, they claim what is referred to as the recovery rebate credit on the 1040. So essentially, the economic impact payments that went out last spring, summer, and then in January for the second wave, they were advance payments of the recovery rebate credit. So if someone received all of their economic impact payments, then the line item on the 1040 for the recovery rebate credit, it should be 0. It should not have any entry. And I know Professor Balsam and his students at the VITA program are, as are all preparers, are asking their clients about any stimulus payments that they received earlier in the year, because they don't want to claim a recovery rebate credit where the taxpayer has already gotten that stimulus previously through the EIP. Now, this slide just reinforces that a point that if you didn't get the full amount of the economic impact payments, then you may be able to claim an additional recovery rebate credit. Software is very important to do this. We have a worksheet for the recovery rebate credit in the 1040 instructions, but I think it's safe to say, whether it's the VITA volunteers or professional preparers or those who use the free file, they're using software to calculate this. But as the second bullet notes, You do need to know, you the taxpayer, the first and second amount of any economic impact payments or EIP payments before you complete your tax return if you are claiming the recovery rebate credit. I mentioned the worksheet. There's a slide here that mentions that worksheet. And so we did send out notices, and you see them referenced there. They're notice 1444 for the first EIP that went out in spring and summer. And then in January, a 144B notice for the second EIP. And those notices can be very helpful to the professors, volunteers, and other tax pros because they have the dollar amount of the EIP issued. They also indicate the date it was issued and whether it was issued via direct deposit, paper check, or in a relatively small number of cases through a preloaded debit card through a bank that is a partner with the Treasury Department. Now, what if folks come into, let's say, Professor Balsam's site or any of the senator's constituents are getting their taxes done and they don't have that notice, but they know they got some stimulus? Well, they can go to irs.gov, as you see there, and they can set up, if they haven't already set up, an online account, irs.gov/account. And this is a secure account. There's a technical term that cybersecurity folks use called multi-factor or two-factor authentication, somewhat similar to what you might set up for a bank account. If you're going on to do online banking, some of the online sites that offer products and services have multi-factor authentication. Well, we branded the IRS multi-factor authentication, which is needed to set up your online account. We branded it as secure access. So we're encouraging Americans to set up their online accounts because not only then can you get the amounts of stimulus 1 and 2, but you can also download a transcript from your online account. If you need to set up an installment agreement because you owe taxes, you can do that online through your online account. There are a host of things you can do through the online account that are very useful these days. Now, moving fast forward to March 11th, when the president signed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, as I noted earlier, it created a third wave of EIP. So I have a couple of slides here just to give you the big picture of the eligibility. Now I should say that when that law was passed, it was passed a week ago, last Thursday, March 11th, we knew that this legislation was moving through Congress. So our information technology folks, our programmers, were looking to quickly find ways to start to move the stimulus payment, EIP3, out to the American public as intended by the Congress. So we looked at the legislation. As it says here, if you're a U.S. citizen or U.S. resident alien is a tax term. Basically, are individuals who hold a green card, allowing them to be in the U.S. permanently. They're treated, for tax purposes, generally speaking, as U.S. citizens. So if you're a U.S. citizen or resident alien, you're eligible for the third EIP, along with your spouse if filing a joint return, as long as you are not a dependent of another taxpayer or not eligible to be a dependent of another taxpayer on your 2020 return. You have to have a valid Social Security number, and the legislation mandates that your adjusted gross income has to be below these thresholds in order to get the full EIP. 3, $150,000 if married filing joint or qualifying widow or widower, $112,500 if filing head of household, and then 75,000 for other filing statuses. And then, and this is an important slide to give you a snapshot of how the IRS calculates this third EIP. We're going to look at those 2020 returns that have been filed and processed. If they haven't yet been filed and processed, then we go back to look at the 2019 return. And we've been looking at a lot of 2019 returns because we just put out a news release last week saying we've already sent out via direct deposit about 95 million of the third wave of stimulus payments. Now, there were some folks last year in 2020, in order to get EIP 1 or 2, if they did not have a filing requirement, and there are literally millions of Americans whose income is so low they are not required to file a tax return, and if they don't get Social Security benefits, railroad retirement benefits, or veterans benefits, then we didn't know where they were to send out EIP 1 and 2. So many of them used what we had last year called a NonFiler Portal, which you see in the third bullet there. So if they used that last year and we had their information, we will send out the third EIP now to that address. But I suspect that Professor Balsam and the other Vitus sites around the country will be seeing folks who normally don't have a filing requirement and who don't get the government benefits, as indicated on that slide, coming to them for assistance in filing a return so that they can get not only the new stimulus, EIP 3, but they can get that recovery rebate credit on their 2020 return because they didn't get EIP 1 and 2. That's an important initiative by the administration and by the Treasury Department and by the IRS to reach out to literally, we estimate there may be as many as 8 million folks who don't get government benefits, don't file because they're not required to, but who are eligible for these stimulus payments. So if you have no folks and they're not dependents on anybody else's return, those folks, we're looking for help in reaching them and getting them the assistance they need through efforts such as the VITA program. So now I just want to pivot to unemployment because, as Professor Balsam indicated, there was a big change in the legislation passed a week ago. Historically, all unemployment compensation is fully subject to federal tax. Now that's different than state tax, but I'm a federal employee, so I'm going to focus on federal issues. However, Congress recognized that in the year of the pandemic, 2020, many, many millions of Americans who previously did not receive unemployment compensation were now receiving it. So, and they were getting a boost in that unemployment, as you're probably aware, through additional federal supplement to the state unemployment that they file for. So in the March 11th legislation, Congress said that if your adjusted gross income is less than $150,000, you can exclude up to $10,200 of unemployment compensation that was paid to you in 2020. And if spouses if each spouse received unemployment, then each spouse, as long as their AGI on their tax return is adjusted gross income is less than 150,000, they could each exclude up to 10,200. Amounts over that will be subject to tax, and then you lose this benefit if your adjusted gross income on your 2020 tax return is $150,000 or more. Now, well, let me come back. I just want to make, so for Pennsylvania residents, the Pennsylvania Labor and Industry, I think it is, has been issuing 1099-G statements. And those are very important documents to bring to the Vitus sites or to your tax preparer, or if you self-prepare your return, to input them. The professor asked a rhetorical question at the outset about what the IRS is doing to implement this. So a couple of things. On Saturday, a week ago, we put out a worksheet on our website that the software industry has now been using to update the software. And Professor Balsam, I just heard from one of my colleagues in the IRS who works with VITA that the software that your folks use has been updated with the new worksheet. So you can go in and download that for returns you're going to be filing. And it should calculate the excludable portion of the unemployment. However, there are Americans who have already filed returns, maybe about 45 million, thanks, Professor, some of whom are claimed the full amount of the unemployment because they filed before the legislation was passed last week. The message as of today, and I know this is being taped for Facebook, so today is March 19th. The message as of today is wait for further guidance from the IRS. Our commissioner testified before Congress yesterday. He always testifies in tax season. And he indicated to the leaders of Congress that we are working on a software fix so that those who've already filed and claimed the full amount of the unemployment, if they're eligible to exclude up to $10,200, we're hoping to do software programming very soon that would generate refunds to them based on a recalculation. So don't file amended returns if you've already filed a return claiming the full amount of unemployment. Wait for further guidance from the IRS. Unfortunately, cyber criminals have attempted to take advantage of the pandemic. So we have seen instances where Pennsylvania residents have received 1099-Gs either from Pennsylvania or in some cases from other states. I spoke with a taxpayer in the Pittsburgh area a couple of weeks ago who has never set foot into the state of Kentucky and never filed for unemployment last year. She got a 1099-G from the state of Kentucky. So clearly, somebody had gotten her Social Security number and filed fraudulent unemployment. She should not report income on a fraudulent 1099-G for unemployment she did not receive. She should report it to that state. So she's reporting it, in this example, to Kentucky, and so that they can reissue a corrected 1099-G. And then my final point before we get into the Q&A, taxpayers also on occasion, if they have their Social Security numbers, their dates of birth stolen, fraudsters try to file electronically fraudulent returns. One way to protect oneself from having a fraudulent return filed is to get what we call an IP PIN, Identity Protection Personal Identification Number. This program is open to all taxpayers. They can voluntarily go in. They do have to have that IRS account set up with secure access, because to use that Get an IP PIN tool on the slide, you have to first go through your IRS account. Once you've set it up, then you get an IP PIN that you can use for your 2020 tax return if you haven't yet filed. And then each year in January, you would go back to your online account and get your new IP PIN for that next tax year. So this is the first year we've expanded the availability of the opt-in IP PIN to all taxpayers. I call it the belts and suspenders method of protecting your tax return when you e-file. And I suspect that Professor Balsam on occasion has seen taxpayers come in with a letter from the IRS if they were victims of identity theft in a prior year that involved their tax return. They get a letter in January with their IP PIN. But now anyone, even if they haven't been a victim of identity theft, can go in and voluntarily get an IP PIN. So there's my contact information, my email address. If you ever have any questions for me, two caveats. First, I really don't do tax research for taxpayers. I may be able to point you to IRS resources. I certainly don't prepare tax returns, although I have worked in the VITA program in prior years. But I can maybe point you in the right direction if you need information. And with that, Bailey, let me turn it back over to you, if I may.
Sounds good. Thank you both for those presentations. Definitely a lot of info to take in, but all very important. So we appreciate that. We're going to go through some questions. You guys answered a decent amount of them, so that's great. What I'm going to start off with was pre-submitted to us on our website by a few people. And I think, Richard, you kind of touched on this, but I just want to clarify. If someone hadn't filed their taxes in 2019 or 2020, but still obviously want to receive their stimulus checks, should they then file this year, or is the NonFilers Portal open still or might reopen? Yep.
Thank you. Very, very important, very timely question. So the short answer is those individuals who have not yet filed 19 or 20 who are eligible for EIP 1, 2, and now 3 must file a 2020 tax return for two reasons. First, EIP 1 and 2, which is no longer being issued separately, is claimed on the 2020 tax return on that new line number, it's line 30, for which is now called the recovery rebate credit. So they'll get that as part of their refund. And then once we process the 2020 return, within a few weeks or a month or so, the IRS computers will pick that up and issue a separate EIP 3 if they're eligible based on their 2020 return. The NonFiler Portal that was open through late November last year has not been reopened, and as of today, there are no plans to reopen that. If that changes, I'll let your office know, Bailey.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to then head into some questions about the new relief bill that hopefully you'll be able to answer, but we'll see if everything has been shaken out yet. So we've had a few people ask if they'll be eligible for the latest $1,400 checks if they are an adult-aged dependent, which you a little bit touched on, but if you could go a little into that.
Yes, certainly. So big change in the Marshall legislation for EIP 3, which the question refers to, is that whereas in the first two pieces of legislation that created EIP 1 and 2, the additional amount of stimulus added on to, let's say, the parent or the taxpayer claiming the dependent was only available for those dependents under the age of 17. Now it's been opened up to all dependents. So on EIP, and it's been increased. So now the EIP 3 is $1,400 per taxpayer plus $1,400, whereas previously it was either $500 or $600, EIP 1 and 2, $1,400 for each dependent. So that is a significant monetary increase, Bailey, which can be a real lifeline to folks still struggling. So that's why the 2020 returns, if not yet filed, are so important. I suspect some of the senators' constituents who had filed 19 but have not yet filed 20 and who are eligible for EIP 3, they had a direct deposit on their 19 return, they may have already seen that money come into the bank account, and significantly more than in the past. So great question.
Great. Next question. Will the IRS deduct back child support or other federal or state debts from the third stimulus payment?
The answer is no. Under the legislation, we are not offsetting, to use IRS jargon, any of the stimulus to back child support, student loans, delinquent state taxes. That is the intent of Congress, to get that money out. So this is unlike the normal portion of the refund, which can be offset to outstanding liabilities from a delinquent child support, student loan, or an IRS debt. That is not the case with this stimulus, the third wave, Bailey.
Mm-hmm. And could you talk a little bit about the changes made to the child tax credit? I know you said that's a little bit in progress.
Yeah.
And how much more people would potentially get?
Well, here as a IRS communicator, I have to be very careful because I can give you the overview, but I don't, and I can indicate what the plans are for the second half of the year to start moving some of this child tax credit monies out using new computer systems similar to what we're doing with the stimulus. But basically now, the child tax credit, which has been around for over 20 years, is a credit that up until now was limited. I think it was about $2,000. Professor Balsam, correct me if I'm wrong. And it's been, thank you, it's been now increased under the American Rescue Plan to $3,000 per child and $3,600 for children under the age of 6. So that's a significant tax credit. And just because we're not speaking to folks who may not fully understand the difference between a credit and a deduction. A credit is an offset against your tax liability. A deduction reduces your income subject to tax. And a refundable tax credit, such as the child tax credit, the other big refundable credit in the Internal Revenue Code is the earned income credit. They can generate refunds above and beyond your tax liability. So this will be fully refundable, this increased child tax credit beginning in 2021. But to get this money out to families later this year, Congress directed IRS to build a portal, if you will, so that we can send out, based on the 2020 tax return information, the advance payment in segments, maybe on a monthly basis. And here's where we haven't worked out all of the details. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly, but an advance payment of some of that $3,000 or $3,600 in the case of children under the age of 6. And this is why, Bailey, I think as I get more information, if you feel that your constituents would like another session on this, I probably would be in a position to speak to them, I would say maybe in June, July of this year.
Awesome.
So don't spend the money yet, but we're working on it.
Perfect. Last one on this kind of topic. You mentioned that if you had received unemployment and already filed your taxes to hold off for now. But just in general, if anyone wanted to make changes to their taxes they'd already filed, how much time will they have to do that?
Well, generally, we get, I mentioned we get about 160 million 1040s every year. We get about, last time I checked the stats, about 4 million amended returns. We call them 1040Xs. So we'll probably be on track to do that. So the message I'm hoping to share today is that if the reason for an adjustment to your return solely involves the unemployment that you fully reported, don't do anything. I think we will have an announcement very soon. And when that announcement comes out, Bailey, I'll send it to you to share. But if there are other reasons, let's say, and I know the professor, and he might want to weigh in, sometimes he sees taxpayers, maybe even in the same tax season, come back to you and say, I forgot to give you this W-2 and for wages, and there's some withholding. So then once the return's filed, would you do an amended return for that, professor?
Yes, and we often have that because, as you know, taxpayers who are getting a refund are really anxious to get that refund. So they come in the first week, and then they get a 1099 int, or they get another W-2 for a job they forgot they had in January. So yes, we have done same season amended returns.
So does that help, Bailey?
Yeah, okay. Definitely. Thank you. Okay, this one is a bit of a long question, so hopefully we can stay with it. So employees can exclude up to $5,250 for income for student loan repayments made by an employer after March 27th of 2020 and on or before December 31st, 2020. The exclusion is subject to the same restrictions as an educational assistance program. The exclusion appears to be available regardless of whether the student loan repayment has any connection to COVID-19. Is that correct?
Here's where sometimes I would say I think that is correct. That read the latter part of that question, the tail end of
So the exclusion appears to be I'm sorry, let me get
now,
this together.
I think this is a provision for the 2021 tax year. Is that your understanding, Professor? And so that
No, I actually thought it was for 2020. I haven't seen any this year, but I think it is for 2020.
okay. I may have to take a look at that one, Vale,
Okay.
and back to you. Now, because if it is for 2020, I would have anticipated, knowing the way our communications work, that we would have put something out in the past week on this, just making folks aware. And I haven't seen anything. So I want to take a look at that. Maybe
Yeah, I can send that to you.
Okay.
And then kind of related, are there any student loan related provisions from this recent federal bill for 2021 that we know of?
Professor, I think you had weighed in on that on a video that you did recently.
I'm not sure I did, but from what I understand, that if there is student loan forgiveness for the next 5 years, it will be tax-free. So normally, if somebody forgives a loan, that is actually treated as income to you. But I think it's under this bill that for the next 5 years, student loan forgiveness is tax-free. I think that was in this last bill.
Yep, I think that's right. I think I saw, as someone with student loans, I think I saw that. Just a few more questions here, a few more minutes. Something about unemployment compensation. I applied for UC in 2020, but I have yet to be approved or receive any payments. How or when do I report these earnings? And what if I file my tax returns for 2020 and then receive UC for weeks in 2020 after the fact? Do I need to amend my returns?
Well, for taxpayers, generally income that is taxable is subject to reporting in the year that it's received. So if an individual filed for unemployment in 2020 but had never received $1 and then gets unemployment in 2021, my belief is that Pennsylvania will issue a 1099-G for 2021, and you'd be subject to the rules in place at that time. Now, this $10,250 of exclusion that I discussed is only for 2020 returns. So if they're, and we're watching to see what happens with unemployment claims, as is Congress, in 2021. So it's conceivable they could pass other legislation later in the year excluding a certain amount of unemployment from tax in 2021, particularly since they've extended that supplemental unemployment for a certain amount through most of this year. So if they would not be reporting that on the 2020, that income, or taking an exclusion on the 2020 return because they didn't receive that income. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Oh, totally. I mean, most taxpayers are what we call cash basis. So you recognize it as income when you receive it, even if it was for a prior year.
Right.
Okay, makes sense. Here's a pretty common question. Do I need to pay taxes on my $1,200 and $600 stimulus checks from 2020?
Well, the answer is no. Very common question. So no, even if you bring in that notice 1444, I suspect a lot of your volunteers, Steve, and other tax preparers are getting that question. So they always good to give good news to your customers. No, that stimulus is not taxable.
Yeah, actually, the only reason we will ask a client about that is to make sure they got it. So as Richard said, you can claim it, if you didn't get the full 1,800, and we have lots of clients that didn't, we put down the amount they received, and the software will generate as part of their refund what the part they didn't receive.
I think we just have time for one more question. This is a question for folks who've been working at home. I normally work from an office, but my employer required I worked from home for X amount of months. Can I deduct my utilities or other expenses?
So now this gets into an area that can be fairly technical in the code. So for employees who meet certain requirements, and these are longstanding requirements under the code, there may be some household expenses for, let's say, that home office that would be deductible up until a couple of years ago when the prior administration and the prior Congress passed a big tax bill that basically eliminated for employees. So we're assuming this is a W-2 employee working from home at the direction of their employer who is not being reimbursed by that employer. The answer would be no. And this is why some employers, and particularly some large employers who had the means to do this, who mandated that their employees work from home, they provided them tax-free certain equipment to work from home. I know in the federal government, some of our employees at the IRS who had never teleworked were given printers and in some cases computers, owned by the IRS, but not by them, and they get a tax-free benefit. But the answer is no. You cannot, under the current law, claim the business use of the home as an employee for expenses you're incurring because your employer told you to work from home. So maybe you can ask them to give you, if you need to print things, give you some paper, send some paper tax-free, wouldn't be on your W-2, or compensate you in other ways that under what is called an accountable plan, meaning the employee accounts for the expenses they're claiming, much like if they're traveling for the employer, and then that accountable amount that you're claiming does not show up on your W-2 as income. Okay. That's the way to do it.
Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time. So we'll end things here. Thank you both again so much for doing this with us. We're going to put, if it's okay, your email or contact or information on our senatorcollett.com/taxes for everyone in case anyone has further questions. You can also always reach out to Senator Collett's office with tax questions or any other state or local resources. If you need assistance, you can contact us at Senator Collett at pasenate.com or give us a call at 215-368-1429. We are all here to help. So thanks again for everyone joining us today. Remember, taxes are due May 17th now. And thank you guys for joining us. Have a good rest of your day.